of COVID assist, as well as what they're doing in relation to bushfire preparedness, as well as what they're doing with the critical work in the Pacific following on from the cyclone. So I want to thank all of our defence personnel who have worked right through the Christmas break and supporting people in Australia. Then lastly, I want to reflect on vaccines. We've had some very important news. We see the AstraZeneca vaccine is making progress both in the UK, in the US and in Europe. I've been briefed this morning by the global head of AstraZeneca and the Australian head of AstraZeneca. Our vaccine program is on track and ahead of schedule. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is progressing well, both in terms of results and in terms of its passage through the UK, US and European processes. I'll let them speak for themselves. They have submitted additional data within Australia, and we're expecting the final data for consideration in late January to early February. Pfizer should be complete during January. AstraZeneca will be late January to early February. And we have our confirmation of supplies from the global head only this morning, both international supplies and domestic production, which is being done here in Australia by CSL. Our Pfizer contract has been completed with the confirmation of distribution to Australia also locked in over the course of Christmas, with our Department of Health officials working literally right through Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So I want to thank all of those who've been involved, to say to Australians who've been tested, you've done a magnificent job, but please keep coming forward to be tested. And for New Year's Eve, stay safe, stay out of the Sydney CBD. The message from the Premier could not be clearer, and as a Commonwealth government, we support and reaffirm that advice. But Australians have been magnificent this year, and they've been magnificent over Christmas, and the proof is literally in the pudding. The fact that Australians have been able to gather together safely, whilst those in other parts of the world have been all too sadly prevented, and in some cases we see hospital systems under immense and profound challenge in the most developed of all communities. That says that what we've been doing is working, we'll continue to do it, and we'll continue to keep Australians safe. Happy to take any questions, I think starting with Tamsin.
Thanks, Minister. I've just got 3 questions, but they're all on the same topics. If you'll bear with me. The US has implemented a need for people coming from the UK to test negative before boarding a flight to the US. Is that something we're considering here? And given the highly contagious nature of this strain in the UK, are there any other measures that the hotel quarantine systems taking passengers from the UK at the moment should be implementing? And also just a data update, how many cases of this new strain have been confirmed in Australia now?
Sure. So firstly, in terms of the testing as opposed to the hotel quarantine, Australia has arguably the most rigorous entry limitations in the world. There are a couple of jurisdictions that match that, but 14-day quarantine is not widely used in the rest of the world. On the discussion with the Prime Minister only this morning, the Chief Medical Officer reaffirmed that although it is tough, although it is exacting, although many would find it difficult, and having been through quarantine twice myself, I understand how challenging it can be. His view, the Chief Medical Officer's view, is that Australia should not reduce that requirement in favour of a pre-testing arrangement, that the highest standard in the world is the 14-day hotel quarantine, and we won't be relinquishing that for anybody else. So that will remain our standard. The lesser standard of test and travel is not something that we think is sufficiently safe for the Australian context.
We do both, though.
The best advice from the Chief Medical Officer only this morning is that the right approach for Australia is the approach of the hotel quarantine. They have concerns that a test does not in any way guarantee that somebody is not symptomatic when they fly or when they arrive in Australia. Only that 14 days provides the full guarantee that Australians require. But the medical expert panel will continue to review advice from around the world, and if they believe that other measures are necessary, they'll adopt them, but they won't be watering down that Australian approach. The additional questions, please.
Sorry, yes, just further on that, how many cases of the virus are now, the UK strain, are now confirmed in Australia?
Look, I'll refer that to the Department of Health, and they'll provide a statement this afternoon. We haven't had the update on that this morning, so I'll let the Department of Health provide that in writing to you today. And then in terms of the strengthening of hotel quarantine, we have had 2 rounds of review. We've had firstly the Holton review, where Jane Holton has looked and made recommendations for all states and territories, overwhelmingly found it to be one of the strongest systems in the world. We thank Victoria for adopting the recommendations, and they have implemented a new system, a dramatically new system, which we believe is strong and effective, and vastly stronger and more effective than it was previously. Other states and territories were already strong but have adopted the Holton reviews. At the same time, Alan Finkel, the chief scientist, has reviewed the testing and tracing systems, but that has implications for hotel quarantine, and again, all states and territories have adopted those measures. We also have a clinical evidence team, and they're reviewing advice and evidence from around the world. And so I think that's a very important thing for Australians to understand, that there's constant review feeding into the medical expert panel from communicable disease experts and the finest researchers in the country. I think Steph from the ABC.
Thanks, Minister. I've got 2 questions. I'll just start with one. What did you learn from the briefing with AstraZeneca today? Can you provide any specific details?
Yes, I can. There are 2 important developments with regards to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. First, it's not just on track, but we are hopeful that we will have both domestic production and international imports ahead of schedule. And I think that's reassuring, reaffirming, and an important point of hope. Secondly, that their progress through the international regulators is also ahead of where I had previously understood it to have been. The results are good, and I think that's the important thing. They're early, they don't have all of the data in yet, but the results are good, and that means that we will have, subject to our Australian regulators agreeing, a safe, effective and plentiful vaccine. And we've set March as our commencement date. I'll continue to provide that, but we are ahead of schedule, and our approach is to under-promise and over-deliver, and always to make sure that not only do we have a safe and effective vaccine, but we have the strongest safety and assessment processes through what I think is arguably the best regulator in the world in the TGA.
And further to that then, Minister, the CEO of AstraZeneca, as I'm sure you're aware, claims that the COVID-19 vaccine is just as effective as Pfizer and Moderna, but the data to back this up hasn't been released. So should we be sceptical about this statement given the information is yet to be made public?
No, I've actually tested exactly those questions this morning with the global head of AstraZeneca, Pascal Soireau, and we've spoken today, and they have always sought to, in my view, set expectations lower and then to over-deliver, and I think that's a very wise approach. Our regulators are increasingly confident that the choices that we've made are likely to be backed up by regulatory approval. They're the choices of the medical expert panel, then backed and put into action by the government. And so what we're seeing is the world is likely to be in the fortunate position of having a number of vaccines that are highly effective. We are in the fortunate position of having 3 vaccines at this stage, all of which are on track to being highly effective, available, and then rolled out safely across the Australian population. Jonathan.
Minister, Merry Christmas to you and your family. Thanks very much for your time. Just with the planned rollout of the vaccine, where do teachers sit in this? Because the March timeline coincides with schools going back, and there are any plans to move teachers higher up the order to reduce the potential for spread in those environments? And secondly, the difference between the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine. Clearly there's issues around storage. The AstraZeneca one is easier and cheaper to make. The government has ordered 53 million of those compared to 10 million of the Pfizer. What's your justification and reasoning behind that? Just responses to those two questions, please, Minister.
Well, again, the choice of vaccines and the volume of the vaccines has been recommended by Professor Brendan Murphy's panel. That includes the Chief Medical Officer, but also the heads of the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation. So, as has always been the case, the selection of vaccines is very, very much, as it should be, a matter for medical expertise. They've chosen it on the basis of what they believe will be safe and effective, and we've ordered it in the volumes that they have recommended, and that's the basis on which they have made those choices. One important consideration is that the world has never had what's called an mRNA vaccine before. Pfizer and Moderna are both mRNA vaccines. The Oxford AstraZeneca is a viral vector vaccine, and the Novavax is a protein vaccine. And so there are three different vaccines, and the mRNA is, however, new and not previously used for any form of communicable disease on all of the advice that I have. So that's why they've approached that on the basis that they have, and I think the latest advice will be very, very good news for Australians, that Pfizer is progressing well, Oxford is progressing well, and whilst we await more data on Novavax, the last advice we have is that it is progressing well. It's likely that Pfizer will have the first of the approvals in Australia on the latest advice from the TGA, and we've been working with them and signing the final agreement on distribution, and we'll begin with whichever vaccine has first approval and delivery. The Oxford vaccine, we're expecting 3.8 million units in Australia before the end of February, with production of the first batch in Australia already complete, and now it goes to what's called the fill and finish. So if you think of it as the production and then the bottling, as it were, or the fill and finish, to use the formal term, is the next phase, and both of those are slightly ahead of schedule, and I think that's positive. Anything else, Jonathan?
Yeah, but just on the teachers' question, is there any proposal or consideration of moving teachers higher up the order to reduce the risk of spread in those environments of tight-knit, closely knit groups?
Sure. So the medical expert panel has provided the early guidance, and that is that it will be, not surprisingly, as has been the case around the world, we begin with our health and medical workers, with our elderly aged care residents, and in particular as well with the frontline workers in the quarantine scheme. That's where the risk of spread is deemed to be the greatest. They will then provide further advice on subsequent rounds, and so I won't preempt that, but we'll continue to follow whatever is the medical expert advice, as we do with other vaccines. Chloe.
Thank you, Minister. Just quickly, as the CEO of AstraZeneca, his phrase in the headlines in the UK was, they've got a winning formula. Based on your briefing to the CEO this morning, do you agree? Is it a winning formula?
I do think that with AstraZeneca and Pfizer, we have two of the vaccines that will be most readily available and widely available, safe and effective, and after that Novavax is also looking very good. So I would put it this way, the advice from AstraZeneca is of great hope for Australians, and the advice from the regulators is of great hope regarding both the early vaccines, Pfizer and AstraZeneca. In short, I think it will be a good new year for Australians, but I also think it will be a safe and healthy new year for Australians. Anything else, Chloe?
You mentioned a couple of
of times, not only today but in previous press conferences, ahead of schedule, well on track. Is there any likelihood that we would see the vaccine rolled out earlier than March?
Our guidance remains March, and our approach is to under-promise and over-deliver. We are in the hands of the data. So what drives the time frame? Really, there are three elements. We have to have the data, which comes from the international clinical trials, and we're expecting the final data in late January from both of the leading candidates. Then we have to make sure that we actually test the physical stock, and plans are underway to do that. That's a 14-day process. It's not something that has necessarily been done in other countries that are facing a life-threatening emergency of hundreds or thousands of lives lost per day, but it's something which the regulator absolutely recommends for Australia, to say that we would release batches without having done that 14-day safety test of the actual batch is not something they're recommending, and not something we would ever want to bypass in Australia. And then finally there is the distribution. But all three of those, they are ahead of schedule. So the simple answer is we'll stick by our March time frame, but our goal is always under-promise, over-deliver, and we expect that Australians will be fully vaccinated by the end of October, on the basis of it's free, it's universal, and it's entirely voluntary. But we want to urge as many Australians to be vaccinated, and we've seen some very heartening reports over the weekend of an expected uptake of up to 80%. We would like to see as many Australians as possible be vaccinated, but in order to do that, they have to have the confidence that our regulators are making sure that every safety step is ticked, and we're ticking all of those boxes just a little bit earlier than expected. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.